Unlike in males, the female sexual cycle involves both changes in gonads and changes in the uterus. And this happens monthly. We call this the female sexual cycle. On average, it lasts about 28 days, but it can vary between individuals, lasting anywhere from 20 to 45 days. So during the female sexual cycle, we're going to see changes in the ovaries, called the ovarian cycle, and then changes in the uterus, called the uterine or menstrual cycle. And they are coordinated because the changes in the ovaries cause the release of hormones, which cause changes in the uterus. So this whole process is controlled by a hierarchy of hormones. It starts off with the hypothalamus, which releases gonadotropin-releasing hormone. Gonadotropin-releasing hormone travels right to the pituitary, not very far away, where it can cause the release of luteinizing hormone and follicle-stimulating hormone. LH and FSH, as they're better known, will then travel to the ovaries, and they will lead to the production of the hormones estrogen and progesterone by the ovaries. Estrogen and progesterone will then travel to the uterus and cause changes to occur in the uterus, basically preparing the uterus for pregnancy. The ovaries exert negative feedback control over the hypothalamus and pituitary. So high levels of what hormones will turn off GnRH, LH, and FSH. If you said estrogen and progesterone, you are correct. The female sexual cycle is actually two different cycles. It's looking at what's happening in the ovaries versus what's happening in the uterus. So we have the ovarian cycle, and then we have the uterine or menstrual cycle. First up is the ovarian cycle. There are changes that occur in the ovaries every 28 days. There are three major parts to the ovarian cycle. The follicular phase, which would be days 1 through 13, ovulation, which typically occurs around day 14, and then the luteal phase, which will occur through days 15 through 28. During the follicular phase, as the name suggests, stuff is happening with the follicle. We're going to get development of that follicle. And we know this because we've already studied folliculogenesis, and we know that in order for ovulation to occur, we need to go through those primary, secondary, tertiary, and then mature stages of our follicle. After ovulation, the luteal phase comes into play, and we know already from folliculogenesis that after ovulation, the follicle is prepared and turned into the corpus luteum, hence the name luteal phase. Let's take a closer look at these different phases. The follicular phase, again, involves basically the first half of those 28 days. During this time, there's very low estrogen levels that are coming from the ovaries. And don't forget, that's because the follicle is developing, which means we're getting those thecal cells to develop and those granulosa cells to develop. And as those develop more and more, we will make more and more estrogen. But what's causing the follicle to develop is a hormone called follicle stimulating hormone, right? FSH. So FSH is a hormone that's going to come from the pituitary, travel to the ovaries, and then cause folliculogenesis. But what causes FSH to be released? That is GnRH, also known as gonadotropin-releasing hormone. So let's take a look at what's going on here, okay? Down at the bottom of the page, we can see we have a brain, we have a hypothalamus, and a pituitary, right? What's going to happen at the beginning of the ovarian cycle is gonadotropin-releasing hormone will travel from the hypothalamus to the pituitary, what will cause the release of FSH. The FSH then travels to the ovary, where it will cause the follicle, it will stimulate the follicle to develop. The follicle, as it develops, will eventually start to produce estrogen. And as we'll learn later, estrogen is actually traveling to the uterus, where it will cause changes to occur in the uterus. Day 14 of the ovarian cycle is ovulation. Don't forget that prior to this, those granulosa cells from the ovaries were growing and growing and growing and releasing more and more and more estrogen. Once estrogen levels reach a peak critical concentration level, this actually causes something really important to happen. Those peak estrogen levels feed back to the hypothalamus and pituitary, causing a surge in the release of luteinizing hormone, LH. And the surge in LH, this big release of luteinizing hormone, is what will cause the process of ovulation to occur. So luteinizing hormone causes ovulation, and then luteinizing hormone will start the development of the corpus luteum. Let's take a look at this process in a more pictorial format. As that follicle grows, it makes more and more estrogen. The estrogen travels to the hypothalamus and pituitary, ultimately leading to the release of luteinizing hormone from the pituitary. Luteinizing hormone causes ovulation to occur, and then afterwards the luteinizing hormone will be responsible for forming the corpus luteum in the ovary. Don't forget that the fimbriae, which are shown here in the picture, will sweep that egg into the fallopian tube. The last part of the ovarian cycle, days 15 through 28, are the luteal phase. During the luteal phase, ultimately what's happening is the ruptured follicle is repairing into the corpus luteum. This is dictated by the luteinizing hormone that had just previously surged. So the luteinizing hormone surges, causes ovulation, and then the luteinizing hormone kind of steadies off, and that's what allows the corpus luteum to form. As the corpus luteum forms and grows larger and larger, it starts to secrete a hormone, progesterone. Progesterone is necessary for maintaining the endometrial lining of the uterus so that menstruation doesn't occur if an embryo has implanted. If fertilization occurs, the embryo will begin to release a hormone called human chorionic gonadotropin hormone, better known as HCG. This is the hormone that can be detected in urine early in pregnancy. HCG is released by the embryo, and it tells the corpus luteum to stay and maintain the release of progesterone. If fertilization does not occur, there will be no HCG hormone. And without that HCG hormone, at the end of the ovarian cycle, the corpus luteum will begin to break down and stop releasing progesterone. Here we see the process of folliculogenesis, but let's add in the hormones that we just talked about with the ovarian cycle. Not shown in the image here, don't forget that the hypothalamus will produce gonadotropin releasing hormone, which causes the release of FSH. FSH is what's going to cause the beginning of folliculogenesis to occur. So the development of the follicle is stimulated by follicle-stimulating hormone. As the follicle grows larger and larger and larger, don't forget it is also producing a hormone, estrogen. So the estrogen is released by the developing follicle, and it travels to the uterus, causing the endometrium of the uterus to develop and prepare for pregnancy. Once the estrogen levels reach a peak critical concentration, that causes a surge in the hormone, luteinizing hormone, which also is coming from the pituitary. The luteinizing hormone surge is what will cause ovulation to occur. After ovulation, steady levels of luteinizing hormone cause the development of the corpus luteum. The corpus luteum itself is producing the hormone progesterone. Progesterone, like estrogen, will travel to the uterus. Progesterone tells the uterus to maintain that endometrial lining in case pregnancy occurs. If pregnancy does not occur, the corpus luteum will break down. In this image, we can actually see the different stages of folliculogenesis, what's happening in the ovaries, and then we can pair that up with these graphs which show us which hormones are increasing and decreasing and when. Down here we see days of the cycle. So it says days of menstrual cycle, but ovarian cycle would work too. So from days 0 to 13, we have that follicular phase. Day 14 is ovulation, and then 15 through 28 is the luteal phase. So you can see during the follicular phase, the follicle is growing. Don't forget that this is going to be caused by the orange line here, which is our follicle stimulating hormone. As the follicle develops more and more, it starts to make more and more estrogen, which we see here in yellow. Once the estrogen reaches that peak critical concentration, That causes a surge in luteinizing hormone. So here we can see that surge in luteinizing hormone. So this peak in luteinizing hormone was caused by the estrogen peak. And notice the estrogen peak is coming just a little bit before the peak in the luteinizing hormone. Luteinizing hormone surge is what causes ovulation to occur. After ovulation, the luteinizing hormone levels do drop down, but the steady level of luteinizing hormone is what will cause the development of the corpus luteum. The corpus luteum itself is making a hormone, progesterone. So you can see how the progesterone levels are peaking during this luteal phase, and that's because it's being produced by that corpus luteum.